I am Captain Heidi Austin, 32 years old, and I know exactly what a fractured jaw sounds like. Everyone on Beacon Hill thinks I'm the luckiest daughter-in-law in the world for marrying into the Harrington dynasty. But they don't know that behind those exquisitely carved mahogany doors, I am not a wife. I am a prisoner in a high-end, correctional facility. Tonight, at my own lavish birthday party, my husband, the man who once swore before God to protect me, looked at me with dead, soulless eyes and delivered a slap that sent me crashing into the banquet table, strictly following his mother's orders. My blood dripped onto my crimson Dior gown, but I didn't cry. Because Victoria Harrington doesn't know one thing. I've been waiting for this exact blow for 5 years. She thinks she just disciplined me. No, she just triggered her own self-destruct button. Before I tell you how an upper-class gala turned into an FBI crime scene, let me know where you are listening from in the comments. Hit subscribe if you believe that no blue-blooded family has the right to stand above the law. 07 Buzzers Year Hours, Beacon Hill, Boston. The only sound in the dining room was the aggressive ticking of the grandfather clock and the scrape of a sterling silver spoon against fine china. The atmosphere in the Harrington mansion wasn't just quiet, it was surgically sterile. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, heavy with judgment and unspoken threats. I sat at the far end of a mahogany table, long enough to land a small aircraft on, staring down at my breakfast. Half a pink grapefruit, black coffee, no sugar. This was the Harrington standard. In this house, calories were the enemy. And pleasure was a sin unless it could be monetized. Heidi, dear, Victoria's voice floated from the head of the table. It was soft, sweet, and laced with enough arsenic to kill a horse. You're gripping your spoon like a shovel again. I paused. My hand froze mid-air. I didn't look up immediately. In the Army, we call this maintaining tactical patience. I'm sorry, Mother, I said, my voice leveled to a perfect, submissive pitch. Victoria Harrington, the uncrowned queen of Beacon Hill, sighed as if my table manners were personally responsible for the decline of Western civilization. She picked up her linen napkin and dabbed the corner of her mouth, though she hadn't eaten a single bite. It's not your fault, I suppose, she said, her eyes scanning my hands. It's genetic. Those are working hands, bricklayer hands. No matter how much lotion we buy you, they still look like they belong in a trench, don't they? I looked at my hands. These hands had assembled M4 carbines in pitch-black darkness. These hands had stabilized a tourniquet on a bleeding comrade while mortar fire shook the earth in Kandahar. They were strong, steady, and lethal. To her, they were just ugly. I'll try to be more delicate, I replied. Do try. She dismissed me, turning her attention to the floral arrangement. Inside my head, I recited the words of General James Mattis, a mantra that had kept me sane for 5 years in this golden cage. Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet. I wasn't going to kill her. That would be too easy. I was going to dismantle her, brick by golden brick. At 07:15 exactly, the heavy oak doors opened. James walked in. My heart did that traitorous thing it always did. It skipped a beat. Even after everything, even after the drugs and the manipulation, seeing him still triggered a ghost of the love I used to feel. He was wearing a navy Brooks Brothers suit, impeccable and sharp. But the man inside the suit, he was missing. Good morning, Mother, James said. His voice was flat, monotone. It lacked the warmth that used to make me laugh until my sides hurt. James, darling, Victoria cooed. Her demeanor shifted instantly from ice queen to doting matriarch. She stood up and walked over to him, bypassing me completely. I watched, feeling the familiar sting of invisibility. James stood there like a mannequin while his mother reached up to adjust his tie. It was a Windsor knot, already perfect, but she pulled it tighter. It looked less like affection and more like she was winding up a toy soldier. You look tired, darling, she whispered, her fingers lingering on his collar. Did you take your vitamins this morning? Yes, Mother, James replied, staring at the wall over her shoulder. He hadn't looked at me. Not once. I sat there, gripping my coffee cup until my knuckles turned white. Look at me, James, I begged silently. Just one glance. Show me you're still in there. But the husband who had once defied this woman to marry me was gone, buried under layers of psychological conditioning and whatever chemical cocktail Dr. Whitley had prescribed this week. He was a shell, a weapon she kept polished and loaded, pointed directly at my heart. Sit, James, Victoria commanded softly. Heidi was just demonstrating how not to hold silverware. Perhaps you can teach her later. James sat. He picked up his spoon. He ate his grapefruit. He didn't speak to me. I checked my watch. 7:30. If you'll excuse me, I said, standing up. I need to prepare for the party tonight. Victoria didn't look up. Wear something that covers your arms, Heidi. We don't want people thinking we beat you. And try to look less military. It's a gala, not a deployment. Yes, Mother. I walked out of the dining room with a straight spine. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a steady rhythmic cadence. Left, right, left, right. I held my breath until I reached the second floor, navigated the labyrinth of hallways, and entered the master suite. I didn't stop in the bedroom. I walked straight into the walk-in closet, a space larger than the apartment I grew up in. Rows of designer gowns that I hated hung like corpses in plastic bags. I moved to the back, behind a rack of winter coats, and pressed a hidden panel in the mahogany shelving. It clicked open. There, nestled between a stack of cashmere sweaters, was my lifeline. A ruggedized, military-grade laptop that Victoria didn't know existed. I opened it. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light, a stark contrast to the warm, suffocating yellow of the house lamps. I typed in my password, a sequence of numbers from my old unit ID. Intel report, incoming. My eyes scanned the encrypted email from my contact at the CID. Subject, trust fund disbursement, H-hour status. Active timeline, funds unlock in 12 hours. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. 12 hours, 5 years of humiliation, 5 years of eating grapefruit and swallowing insults. 5 years of watching the man I love fade into a gray fog. It all came down to this. The Harrington Family Trust required James to be married and stable until his 35th birthday to access the principal assets Victoria had been draining illegally for years. Tonight the money would legally transfer to James. And since I had power of attorney hidden in a stack of documents James signed during a rare moment of clarity 3 years ago, tonight I could freeze it all. But I needed one more thing. I needed a reason for the FBI to storm a private residence on Beacon Hill without a warrant. I needed exigent circumstances. I needed violence. I closed the laptop and hid it again. I turned to the full-length mirror at the end of the closet. I stripped off my silk blouse. My reflection stared back. I looked thin, too thin for a soldier. But the muscle was still there, coiled and tense. I rotated my arm, looking at the inside of my wrist. There was a bruise there, old, yellowing, fading into the pale skin. A parting gift from Victoria's gentle guidance last week when she grabbed me too hard to stop me from speaking to a neighbor. I traced the bruise with my finger. It throbbed slightly, a dull ache that grounded me. It wasn't just an injury, it was fuel. Just one more day, I whispered to the reflection. My eyes, usually warm blue, looked back at me with the cold precision of a sniper scope. Just one more day and I burn this whole house down. Tonight, I wouldn't just be the dutiful wife. Tonight, I was going into combat. And the first casualty would be their arrogance. I reached for the makeup kit on the vanity, but my hand paused over the concealer. For a second, a memory flashed. A ghost from a time before the silence, before the fear. A memory of these same hands, not bruised, but held gently by someone who promised never to let go. I closed my eyes, letting the past wash over me for just a moment, needing to remember why I walked into this trap in the first place. My fingers stopped on the yellowing bruise on my wrist. It throbbed under the harsh closet lights, a dull, rhythmic ache. But strangely, it wasn't the pain that made my chest tighten. It was the memory of a different touch. A touch from 5 years ago, before the bruises, before the silence. I closed my eyes and the smell of mothballs and cedar in the closet vanished. Suddenly, I was back in the ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza. It was the annual Veterans Fundraiser. I was 27, fresh from a deployment, wearing my dress blues. In a sea of black tuxedos and designer silk gowns, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I felt the eyes of Boston's elite on me, judgmental, assessing, dismissing. "Excuse me." A woman with a diamond necklace the size of a chandelier had sneered, bumping into me. "The coat check is near the entrance, dear. Staff shouldn't be mingling." I had opened my mouth to correct her, to tell her I was a captain in the United States Army, not a coat check girl, but a hand gently touched my elbow. "Actually," a warm baritone voice interrupted, "she's with me. And I believe she outranks everyone in this room, including my mother." I turned and saw him. James Harrington. He wasn't the hollow shell of a man sitting downstairs eating grapefruit right now. He was vibrant. His eyes, a piercing shade of hazel, were alive with mischief and warmth. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and offered me the other. "I'm James," he said, flashing a grin that made my knees weak. "And I'm currently plotting my escape from this zoo. Want to join me?" That night, we sat on the fire escape of the hotel, eating stolen hors d'oeuvres and talking until 3 a.m. He told me he hated the family business. He hated the pretenses. He wanted to open an architectural firm, restore old brownstones, build something real. He looked at me like I was the oxygen he had been gasping for his whole life. "They suffocate people, Heidi," he had warned me, his expression serious for just a moment. "My mother, she consumes people. But with you, I feel like I can finally breathe." I believed him. I fell in love with the man who wanted to be free. But I didn't know that freedom was the one thing Victoria Harrington would never allow. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, insidious creep, like black mold growing behind wallpaper. 6 months after our wedding, the headaches started. James would come home from the Harrington Trust offices pale and trembling. He became irritable, then confused. He forgot our anniversary. He forgot how to drive to the grocery store. Then came the loss of executive function. Victoria descended upon our marital home like a vulture spotting a carcass. She brought Dr. Thomas Whitley with her, a family friend and a concierge doctor who charged $5,000 just to walk through the door. "It's the Harrington curse," Victoria had whispered to me in the hallway, dabbing fake tears from her eyes. "His father had it too. Early onset fragility. He needs rest, Heidi. He needs his vitamins." And so, the pills appeared, little blue capsules, orange tablets. Vitamins, she called them. I was young. I was naive. I wanted to be a supportive wife. I trusted the doctors. I trusted the family. Until the night of the thunderstorm, 3 years ago. Victoria and James had gone to a gala I wasn't invited to. I was alone in the mansion. The power flickered and the security system reset, unlocking the electronic locks on Victoria's private study for exactly 90 seconds. I didn't think. Instinct took over, the same instinct that kept me alive in the sandbox. I slipped into her office. It smelled of expensive perfume and rot. I went straight to the wall safe. It was open a crack. I pulled out a thick file labeled James Harrington, Medical, Confidential. I sat on the Persian rug, using a tactical flashlight to read the documents. My hands shook as I turned the pages. I wasn't a doctor, but as a logistics officer, I knew how to read data. I knew how to spot a pattern. There was no diagnosis of fragility. There was no genetic defect. Dr. Whitley's notes were clinical and cold. Subject showing signs of resistance. Increased dosage of haloperidol and benzodiazepines recommended. Cognitive suppression at 80%. Compliance levels, optimal. I felt the bile rise in my throat. They weren't treating him, they were erasing him. It was Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but twisted into a financial strategy. Victoria didn't want a sick son for sympathy. She wanted an incapacitated son so she could retain control of the Harrington Trust billions. She was chemically lobotomizing her own child to keep her checkbook balanced. I remembered dropping the file, gasping for air as the realization hit me like a mortar round. The The man I loved wasn't gone. He was buried alive under milligrams of chemical concrete, trapped inside his own body, screaming for help while his mother adjusted his tie and fed him soup. If you were in my shoes, standing in that dark office, realizing your spouse was being drugged by their own family, what would you have done? Would you run to save yourself, or stay in the hellhole to fight? Hit the like button if you would fight for the person you love. Comment, "I stay," if you'd burn the house down with them inside, or "I run," if you'd get out alive. I stood up in the closet, snapping back to the present. The reflection in the mirror stared back at me. I touched the cold glass. That night, 3 years ago, I had packed a bag. I had my hand on the doorknob. I was going to run. I was going to flee to a base in Germany and never look back. But then I saw James sleeping in our bed. He twitched in his sleep, a frown etched into his forehead as if fighting a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He had defended me when no one else would. He had looked at me and seen a person, not a servant. I couldn't leave a fallen comrade behind. That is the first rule of being a soldier. You do not leave your brother behind enemy lines. So, I unpacked the bag. I stayed. I played the part of the submissive, stupid daughter-in-law. I let them insult me. I let them think they had broken me. I stood tall in the closet, smoothing my hands over my hips. "I didn't leave you, James," I whispered to the empty room. "And I'm not leaving tonight. But God help them, because I am done playing defense." I reached for the shelf again. It was time to get dressed. Not in the beige rag Victoria sent, but in armor of my own choosing. In the military, we have a term called a SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It's a secure room where no electronic eavesdropping can happen, where the nation's deepest secrets are whispered. For the last 3 years, my SCIF has been a walk-in closet filled with $50,000 worth of shoes I never wear. I sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, the hidden panel open. My ruggedized laptop hummed quietly, a sound that was infinitely more comforting to me than the Mozart Victoria insisted on playing through the house speakers. On the screen, a green progress bar crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Uploading, Harrington, Ledger Cayman V2 XLSX, status 92%. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that contradicted my still, statue-like posture. This wasn't just data. These were digital fingerprints, wire transfers disguised as consulting fees, shell companies in Delaware and Panama. And the most damning of all, the monthly payments to Dr. Thomas Whitley categorized as medical retainer. Payments that coincided perfectly with every decline in James's cognitive health. "Come on," I whispered, urging the progress bar forward. "Don't freeze on me now." I was operating behind enemy lines, and the enemy had the best lawyers in Boston. If I was caught now, I wouldn't just be divorced, I'd be erased. Victoria would paint me as a paranoid, unstable veteran who cracked under the pressure of high society. She'd have me committed to the same facility where she threatened to send James. Status: upload complete. Server: secure. I let out a shaky breath and immediately pulled the microSD card from the laptop. This tiny chip, no bigger than my fingernail, was the bullet that would kill the beast. I shut the laptop, slid it back into its hidden compartment, and sealed the mahogany panel just as the heavy door to the bedroom creaked open. I stood up instantly. Muscle memory. "Mrs. Austen?" It was Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper. She had been with the Harringtons for 30 years, and she looked at me with the same disdain one might reserve for a stain on a silk rug. To her, I was new money. Or worse, no money. "In here, Mrs. Higgins," I called out, my voice steady. She waddled into the closet, carrying a garment bag and a tray. Her face was pinched in a mask of faux concern. "Oh, madam," she sighed, though her eyes were gleaming with malice. "I have terrible news regarding your uniform." My stomach dropped. "My dress blues?" "Yes. It seems there was an accident in the laundry room." She gestured to the garment bag. "One of the new girls, clumsy thing, spilled an entire pot of espresso on it. We tried to get it out, but the wool is ruined." I walked over and unzipped the bag. The dark blue jacket, adorned with my rank insignia and the ribbons I'd earned through sweat and blood in the Afghan dust, was soaked in a brown, sticky mess. It wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally spill coffee inside a sealed garment bag. It was a message. You are not a soldier here. You are nothing. I stared at the ruined fabric. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Mrs. Higgins by her starched collar and demand to know who ordered this. But that's what they wanted. They wanted the angry, aggressive soldier to come out. I slowly zipped the bag back up. Accidents happen, I said coldly. Thank you for telling me. Mrs. Higgins looked disappointed that I didn't break down. She held out the other item, a hanger with a beige dress. Mrs. Harrington selected this for you. She said it would be more appropriate for the setting, less abrasive. Leave it, I said, and get out. She sniffed, turned on her heel, and left. As soon as the door clicked shut, I leaned against the shelving, trembling with rage. They could take my uniform, but they couldn't take my training. My phone buzzed on the vanity. Caller ID, Mother Harrington. I took a deep breath, counting to 4, the tactical breathing technique used to lower heart rate before taking a shot. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. I picked up the phone. Hello, Mother. Heidi, Victoria's voice was crisp. Change of plans. I need you at the venue by 4:80 South, where's 4 p.m. The party doesn't start until 7 year, I replied, checking my watch. It was already 2:80. I know, she snapped. But the florists are incompetent. I need someone to double-check the centerpieces and ensure the seating cards are aligned perfectly. And since you have nothing else pressing to do, I thought you could make yourself useful. She was turning the guest of honor into the event planner, into the help. Of course, she added, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Unless you're too busy playing soldier in your closet. My grip tightened on the phone. Did she know? No, she was fishing. She was just being cruel. I'll be there at 4:00, Mother, I said. I'd be happy to check the flowers. Good girl. And Heidi, wear the beige. Don't embarrass us. Click. She hung up. I stood in the silence of the closet, the humiliation washing over me like cold water. But under the humiliation, there was focus. Sharp, crystalline focus. I walked over to my vanity table. I picked up a compact of expensive powder, Chanel, a gift from James 2 Christmases ago, back when he could still pick out gifts. I popped the compact open. I used a nail file to gently pry up the metal pan holding the beige powder. Underneath, there was a small, hollow space meant for air circulation. I took the micro SD card containing the evidence of 5 years of fraud and abuse. I placed it into the hollow space. Then, I pressed the powder pan back down. It clicked into place. Perfect OPSEC. Operational security. To the naked eye, it was just makeup. A tool for vanity. A symbol of the superficial world Victoria Harrington ruled. But inside, it was a bomb. I looked at the beige dress hanging on the door. It was ugly. It was shapeless. It was a shroud meant to make me disappear into the background. I'll wear your dress, Victoria, I whispered, putting the compact into my purse. And I'll check your flowers. I'll play the good little wife one last time. I grabbed my purse. The weight of it felt different now, heavier. I wasn't just walking out of the house to run errands. I was extracting the payload. I walked out of the closet, past the ruined uniform that smelled of stale coffee, and headed for the door. I had a meeting to get to, a meeting that wasn't on Victoria's schedule, because before I went to the gala to play the victim, I had to stop at a greasy diner on the edge of town to meet the only person left in this city who remembered that Heidi Austin wasn't a servant. She was a captain. And she was about to go to war. The drive to Joe's diner took 20 minutes, but it felt like traveling between 2 different planets. I left behind the cobblestone streets and manicured ivy of Beacon Hill and drove my modest sedan, the only car Victoria allowed me to drive, out to the grittier edge of South Boston. I pulled into the parking lot. The neon sign above the door buzzed with a dying electrical hum, flickering between Joe's and OE's. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me instantly. It didn't smell like lavender and old money. It smelled of bacon grease, stale cigarette smoke lingering in the walls from the 90s, and cheap coffee. To me, it smelled like freedom. I slid into a booth at the back, the red vinyl seat taped over with silver duct tape where the stuffing was coming out. "What can I get you, hun?" A waitress with towering hair and a name tag that read, Doris, asked, popping her gum. "Black coffee," I said, "and a slice of cherry pie." "Warm." "You got it." When the pie arrived, I didn't eat it delicately. I didn't worry about holding my fork like a shovel. I took a bite, the sugary, tart filling exploding in my mouth. It was comfort food, something forbidden in the Harrington household where sugar was treated like a Class A narcotic. The bell above the door jingled. A man walked in. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket and a Red Sox cap pulled low. He looked like a construction worker or a truck driver, which was exactly the point. He slid into the booth opposite me. "Captain," he nodded. "Agent Miller," I replied, taking a sip of the bitter, watery coffee. "Special Agent David Miller, CID." We had served in the same task force in Kandahar. He was the man who had dragged me out of a burning Humvee when an IED took out our convoy. He was the only person on Earth who knew the full extent of my mission. "You look like hell, Austin," Miller said, his eyes scanning my face with professional scrutiny. He wasn't being rude, he was assessing damage. "She's starving you, isn't she?" "I'm fine, Dave," I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out the Chanel Powder Compact. I slid it across the sticky laminate table. Miller covered it with his large, rough hand. He didn't open it. He knew the drill. "The ledger is in there," I said, my voice low. "Offshore accounts, the doctor's payoffs, the trust fund embezzlement, it's all there." Miller pocketed the compact. "This is good work, Heidi. With this, we can build a RICO case. We can freeze their assets. We can indict Victoria for fraud, money laundering, maybe even conspiracy." "But," I asked. I heard the hesitation in his voice. Miller took off his cap and ran a hand through his graying hair. He leaned in closer. "But a financial investigation takes time. Months, maybe a year. As soon as we freeze the accounts, their lawyers will swarm. They'll bury us in paperwork. And James? What about James? If Victoria smells smoke, she'll move him," Miller said grimly. "She has power of attorney over his medical decisions. She could ship him to a private facility in Switzerland tomorrow. If that happens, we lose him. We can't extradite a patient without a hell of a fight." My blood ran cold. Switzerland. I would never see him again. "So, what do we need?" I asked. Miller sighed. He looked down at his hands, then reached across the table. He covered my hand with his. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm. It wasn't the controlling grip of Victoria, nor the limp, drugged touch of James. It was the handshake of a brother, a lifeline. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "Really?" I looked at our hands. For 5 years, I hadn't been touched with genuine kindness. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a dangerous crack in my armor. I swallowed it down. "I'm surviving," I whispered. "Tell me the plan, Dave." Miller squeezed my hand, then pulled back. His face hardened. He switched back to agent mode. "We need exigent circumstances," he said. "We need a reason to kick that door down tonight. Without a warrant. Without waiting for a judge on Monday morning." "Probable cause," I nodded. "More than that, we need an active threat to life or limb," Miller said. "If we have probable cause that a federal officer, you, is being assaulted or held against her will, we can enter. We can arrest everyone on site. We can take James into protective custody immediately as a witness." I understood immediately. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. "You want me to let them hit me," I stated. "I don't want you to do anything," Miller growled, his jaw tight. "I hate this plan. But if you walk in there and just present the financial evidence, they'll laugh and call their lawyers. But if James, or Victoria, if they strike you..." Assault on a federal officer, I finished. It's a felony. Immediate arrest. No bail for 24 hours. Miller looked pained. Heidi, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. There is no other way. Tonight is the deadline. The trust fund unlocks at midnight. I took another bite of the cherry pie, but it tasted like ash now. I thought of James's face this morning, the emptiness. I thought of the bruise on my wrist. How do we capture it? I asked. Miller reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond brooch. It's not real, he said. It's a wire, high-fidelity audio. It transmits directly to our van. We'll be parked 2 blocks away. I picked up the brooch. It was gaudy, something Victoria would approve of. Here's the rules of engagement, Miller said, his voice stern. You need to provoke them. You need to push Victoria until she snaps. But you cannot strike first. You have to take the hit. And once they hit you, you say the code word. What's the word? Done. Miller said. You say, I'm done. And we come in. I pinned the brooch to my blouse. I looked at Miller. If James hits me, he doesn't know what he's doing, Dave. The drugs. We'll sort that out later, Miller said. But he has to be the one to do it. Or her. It has to be physical. It will be, I said, remembering the look in Victoria's eyes this morning. She was desperate. Desperate people are violent. I stood up. I placed a $20 bill on the table, enough to cover the pie and a generous tip for Doris. Heidi. Miller stood up too. He grabbed my shoulder. If it goes south, if they pull a weapon, you get out. Screw the case. You get out. That's an order. I looked at him. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Bones heal, Dave, I said softly. But if I walk away tonight and leave James there, my honor won't ever heal. I turned and walked out of the diner. The wind outside was cold, biting through my thin jacket. I got back into my car. I looked at the brooch on the passenger seat, my weapon. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The cherry pie was gone. The warmth of Miller's hand was fading from my skin. I put the car in gear. It was time to go back to the mansion. It was time to put on the dress, put on the smile, and wait for the pain. By the time I returned to the master suite, the afternoon sun was slanting through the silk drapes, casting long, prison bar shadows across the Persian rug. Lying on the center of the bed, like a threat wrapped in expensive packaging, was a large white box tied with a satin ribbon. I knew what it was before I even touched it. It was my uniform for the evening. I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of crisp tissue paper, lay a dress. It was silk, it was expensive, and it was beige. Not gold, not cream. Beige. It was the color of oatmeal. The color of stale walls in a dentist's waiting room. It was a color designed to make a woman disappear, to blend into the background so perfectly that she became part of the furniture. On top of the fabric lay a small card written in Victoria's elegant, razor-sharp calligraphy. Heidi, please wear this. The neckline is modest, as discussed. Try to look a little less common than usual tonight. We have senators attending. V. Common, that was her favorite word for me. It was a polite Boston way of saying white trash. It was a reminder that while she was born into trust funds and summer homes in Martha's Vineyard, I was born to a mechanic and a school teacher in Ohio. I looked at the dress. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a muzzle. She wanted me to stand in the corner, invisible and silent, while she paraded James around like a prize pony. I felt a heat rise in my chest, not the slow burn of resentment, but the flash fire of combat adrenaline. I walked over to my sewing table in the corner of the room. I picked up my heavy steel tailoring shears. They were cold and heavy in my hand. I walked back to the bed. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the price tag, which was probably more than my father made in a month. Snip. The steel blades sliced through the delicate beige silk with a satisfying crunch. Snip. Rip. I cut the modest neckline in half. I slashed the hem. I destroyed the symbol of my submission. I left the tattered remains of the dress on the bed, a pile of expensive rags. Oops, I whispered to the empty room. Wardrobe malfunction. I turned to the back of my closet, past the rows of sensible, muted clothes Victoria approved of. Hidden in a garment bag at the very end was my own purchase. I had bought it 6 months ago with money I saved from my disability checks, hiding it like contraband. I pulled it out. It was a vintage Christian Dior. And it wasn't beige, it was red. Not a cheerful cherry red. It was crimson, deep, dark, and dangerous. It was the color of arterial blood, the color of warning signs, the color of war. I slipped into it. The silk hugged my body like a second skin, highlighting the muscle I'd worked so hard to build, the strength Victoria tried to shame me for. The neckline plunged just enough to be daring, just enough to say, I am a woman, not a child. I stood before the full-length mirror. The transformation was startling. The tired, beaten-down wife was gone. Staring back at me was Captain Heidi Austin. I reached for the diamond brooch Agent Miller had given me, the wire. I pinned it to the left strap of the dress, right over my heart. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what I was about to do. I closed my eyes and whispered the verse that my chaplain had read to us before our first patrol in the Korengal Valley. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Ephesians 6-11. This dress was my armor. This brooch was my weapon. And the truth was my shield. I'm ready, I said aloud. I grabbed my clutch containing the compact with the stolen data and opened the bedroom door. James was waiting for me in the hallway. He was dressed in a black tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome. For a second, just a second, the fog in his eyes seemed to clear. He looked up as I stepped out, and his breath hitched. His eyes widened. He scanned me from the hem of the red dress up to my face. There was no confusion in his gaze, only a sudden, intense flash of recognition. It was the look he used to give me when I walked into a room. A look of pure adoration and desire. Heidi, he breathed, his voice cracking. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out. You look like fire. My heart leaped. He's in there. He sees me. James, I whispered, reaching for him. But before our fingers could touch, he flinched. A spasm of pain crossed his face. He grabbed his temples, squeezing his eyes shut as if an ice pick had been driven into his skull. James, I asked, alarmed. My head, he groaned, swaying on his feet. Too bright. Too loud. I froze. It was the conditioning. Victoria and Dr. Whitley had programmed him well. Any strong emotion, arousal, anger, excitement, triggered a migraine. It was a chemical leash designed to keep him docile. If he felt anything too intense for me, he was punished by his own nervous system. He lowered his hands. The light in his eyes was gone. The adoration was replaced by a dull, glazed emptiness. Mother is waiting, he said robotically. We shouldn't be late. He turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving me standing there with my hands still reached out. I lowered my arm. The grief threatened to buckle my knees, but I locked them. Lock it down, Austin. Mourn later. Fight now. I followed him down the grand staircase. The household staff stopped their cleaning to stare. Mrs. Higgins dropped a duster when she saw the red dress. Her mouth fell open in horror. I met her gaze and held it until she looked away. The front door opened. The cool Boston evening air rushed in. A stretch limousine sat in the driveway, its engine idling like a purring beast. A black monolith waiting to swallow us. To anyone else, it was just a luxury car ride to a birthday party. But as I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking like gunshots on the pavement, I didn't feel like a socialite. I felt exactly the way I felt sitting on the edge of a Black Hawk helicopter, boots dangling over the edge, waiting for the green light to jump into a hot zone. The wind whipped the hem of my red dress around my legs. I climbed into the back of the limo and sat opposite James. The door slammed shut, sealing us in. To the venue, sir? The driver asked. Yes, James answered flatly. I looked out the tinted window as the mansion faded from view. I touched the brooch on my chest one last time to ensure it was recording. Ephesians 6:11, I repeated in my mind. We were entering the devil's playground now. and I wasn't planning on taking any prisoners. The grand ballroom of the Harrington estate was a masterpiece of old-world intimidation. Crystal chandeliers, imported from France in the 1920s, dripped light onto a sea of people who owned half of Boston. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, the music polite and restrained, just like the guests. But when I stepped through the archway, the music didn't stop. It faltered. A hush rippled through the room. It started near the door and spread outward like a shockwave. I knew what they were looking at. In a room filled with tasteful blacks, navies, and, of course, Victoria's preferred beige, I was a bleeding wound. My vintage crimson Dior dress slashed through their monochromatic world. It was bold. It was loud. It was everything a Harrington wife was not supposed to be. I kept my chin high, my shoulders squared. Shoulders back, chest out, parade rest. Heidi, darling. Victoria materialized from the crowd like a shark sensing blood in the water. She was wearing a silver gown that cost more than my parents' house, and her smile was as sharp as a scalpel. She linked her arm through mine. It wasn't a hug. It was a restraint. Her fingers dug into my bicep, hard enough to bruise. You decided to wear that, she whispered, her voice dropping an octave so only I could hear. You look like a cabaret singer. I thought I'd add some color to the funeral, Mother, I replied, forcing a smile that matched hers. Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she didn't break character. She pulled me toward a group of elderly men holding crystal tumblers of scotch. Senator Collins, Victoria chirped, her voice instantly transforming into sweet honey. Judge Miller. You remember my daughter-in-law, Heidi? Senator Collins, a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen too many backroom deals, looked me up and down. Ah, yes, the army girl. Still playing soldier, my dear? I'm currently a captain in the logistics corps, Senator. I corrected him politely. Victoria laughed. It was a tinkling, condescending sound. Oh, stop it, Heidi. You make it sound so serious. She turned to the senator, patting my hand patronizingly. Heidi is our little charity project, really. She tries so hard to fit in with the family, poor thing. But, well... She lowered her voice to a theatrical whisper. You know what they say. You can pay for an education, but you can't fix breeding. It's genetic, isn't it? The insult landed like a physical slap. Breeding. As if I were a dog. As if my blood was dirty because it didn't come from the Mayflower. I felt the heat rise up my neck. My hand drifted up to my chest, brushing against the diamond brooch. Record that, I thought, get every single word. If you'll excuse me, I said, pulling my arm free from Victoria's grip. I need a drink. I walked away before I did something that would ruin the plan. Like breaking the senator's nose. I made my way to the bar, my heart pounding against my ribs. I ordered a sparkling water. I needed a clear head. He looks bad tonight, doesn't he? I froze. A heavy alcohol-laden breath hit my ear. I turned to see Dr. Thomas Whitley standing too close. His eyes were bloodshot, and he swirled a glass of gin. Get away from me, Thomas, I said. He's twitching, Whitley sneered, looking across the room at James, who was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. His cortisol levels are spiking. Did you upset him, Heidi? Did you try to make him remember again? I'm trying to save him from you, I hissed. Whitley chuckled. He leaned in, his voice dripping with malice. If his blood pressure goes up any higher tonight, I'll have to increase the sedative dosage. And at that level, well, the brain damage becomes permanent. You don't want a vegetable for a husband, do you? Or maybe you do. Easier to manage. I gripped my glass so hard I thought it would shatter. Assault on a federal officer. That was the goal. But right now, I wanted to commit murder. Dinner is served, the butler announced, saving Whitley from a throat punch. I moved toward the dining table. It was a massive 30-foot stretch of mahogany set with heirloom silver and floral centerpieces that probably cost $5,000 each. James took his place at the head of the table. He looked handsome but vacant. A king made of wax. Victoria sat at his right hand. I walked toward the seat on his left, the wife's seat. Oh no, dear. Victoria called out from across the room. Her voice rang out clearly, stopping me in my tracks. Not there. The chatter in the room stopped. Every eye turned to me. We have the governor sitting there tonight, Victoria said, smiling sweetly. We put you down at the end, next to Aunt Margaret. You know how she loves to tell you her knitting stories. She pointed to the far end of the table. The foot of the table. By the swinging kitchen door. It was the seat reserved for children or the disgraced. The message was clear. You are not his wife. You are not one of us. You are the help. I looked at James. He was staring at his plate, picking at the linen napkin. He didn't look up. He didn't defend me. He couldn't. I walked the length of the table. It felt like walking the Green Mile. I could feel the pity and the amusement radiating from the guests. Look at the poor little soldier girl. Look at how she doesn't belong. I sat down next to Aunt Margaret, who was already asleep in her soup. Waiters began to circulate, placing plates of lobster thermidor in front of the guests. The smell of rich butter and cognac filled the air, sickeningly sweet. I checked my watch under the table. 00, Vodro 5 hours. It was past midnight. The trust fund was legally unlocked. The money was there. The trap was set. Now, I just needed the trigger. I looked down the long expanse of the table. 30 feet away, Victoria was laughing at something the governor said. She looked radiant, triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought she had put the commoner in her place. I know so many of you listening right now have sat at a table just like this. Maybe not with senators, but with people who made you feel small. People who invited you just to remind you that you didn't belong. If you have ever been the outsider in your own family, if you've ever had to swallow your pride just to survive a dinner, hit that like button right now. Comment. I see you below, so I know I'm not alone at this table. I took a deep breath. I touched the brooch again. I see you, Victoria. Suddenly, the laughter at the head of the table stopped. Victoria turned. She wasn't looking at the governor anymore. She was looking at James. And then, she looked at me. Even from 30 feet away, I saw the shift. Her eyes went cold. Dead cold. She had decided. The humiliation wasn't enough. She wanted me gone. Permanently. She leaned in close to James. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a specific spot right near the neck. A pressure point, an anchor. I saw her lips move. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the cadence. It was a command. Do it. She pulled back and nodded her head toward me. James stopped picking at his napkin. His head snapped up. Across the candlelight, across the crystal and the flowers and the lies, his eyes locked onto mine. But they weren't James's hazel eyes anymore. The pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. They were black holes. There was no recognition, no love, no hesitation. There was only the mission. He pushed his chair back. The screech of wood against the floor echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He stood up, he turned toward me, and he began to walk. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute cut through the murmurs of the ballroom like a sniper's bullet. It was a delicate sound, refined and polite, but to my ears, it sounded like the racking of a shotgun slide. Victoria Harrington stood at the head of the table. She held her glass high, catching the light of the chandeliers. She looked every inch the benevolent matriarch, but I saw the shark beneath the surface. If I could have everyone's attention, she cooed, her voice amplified by the sudden, terrified silence of the room. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded in my lap. My heart rate was climbing. 100 beats per minute. 110. Tonight, Victoria continued, her eyes sweeping over the senators and judges. We are not just celebrating a birthday, we are celebrating the future of the Harrington legacy. She paused for dramatic effect. She didn't look at me. Not yet. As many of you know, my son James comes into his full inheritance at midnight. And as a mother, my only duty is to protect him. To protect this family from... She let the word hang in the air, thick with implication. From those who would seek to exploit his generous nature. From the predators, the gold diggers who claw their way into our world. Now, she looked at me. It wasn't a subtle glance. It was a spotlight. Every head in the room turned toward the end of the table. I could feel their judgment pressing against my skin like a physical weight. They saw a woman in a red dress who didn't belong. They saw the villain in Victoria's narrative. Therefore, Victoria smiled, a cold, triumphant curving of red lips. We are announcing a complete restructuring of the family assets. Effective immediately, James has signed over power of attorney to me, ensuring that no outsider can touch a single cent of the Harrington fortune. A polite ripple of applause broke out. The guests were clapping for my financial execution. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Let them clap, I thought. They're applauding their own indictment. Victoria lowered her glass. The speech was over. The legal assassination was complete. Now came the physical removal. She stepped away from her chair. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace toward James. Time began to slow down. I watched it happen in high-definition slow motion. I saw the fabric of her silver gown brush against James's tuxedo. I saw the dust motes dancing in the air between them. She leaned in close to him. Her hand rose. It wasn't a caress. It was a trigger. Her manicured fingers dug into the trapezius muscle of his left shoulder. I knew that spot. Dr. Whitley had massaged that spot hundreds of times. It was a Pavlovian anchor. A physical switch wired directly into his nervous system, bypassing his logic, bypassing his heart. She brought her lips to his ear. I couldn't hear the whisper from 30 feet away, but I could read the movement of her jaw. Handle it, now. She pulled back. James sat frozen for a heartbeat. Then, he blinked. When his eyes opened, my husband was gone. From across the table, I saw the physiological shift. It was terrifying. His pupils dilated instantly, swallowing the hazel irises until his eyes were two black pits. The veins in his neck bulged as his blood pressure spiked, driven by the chemical cocktail flooding his veins. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at a threat. He was looking at the enemy. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh, violent screech that made Aunt Margaret jump in her sleep. James stood up. He turned toward me. The room went dead silent. The applause died. The string quartet stopped playing. Even the waiters froze, holding trays of lobster suspended in midair. James began to walk. He didn't walk with the loose, easy gait of the man I married. He walked with the stiff, mechanical stride of a soldier marching into fire. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Thud, thud, thud. His dress shoes struck the hardwood floor. Each step echoed in my chest. 30 feet. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I locked my knees. I pushed the heavy oak chair back. 20 feet. The guests seated between us scrambled out of the way. Senator Collins spilled his scotch. A woman in pearls gasped and pulled her chair back, creating a wide, clear path for James. They were cowards. All of them. They saw a man obviously drugged, obviously aggressive, marching toward a woman, and not one of them stood up. They just watched. It was the bystander effect in its purest, ugliest form. They wanted to see the car crash. 10 feet. My survival instinct, honed by years of military training, screamed at me. Threat detected. Execute defensive maneuver. Block, strike, throat punch, neutralize. My muscles coiled. My right foot slid back automatically into a fighting stance. I could drop him. I knew I could. Even with his size advantage, he was uncoordinated, drugged. A simple leg sweep, a joint lock, and he would be on the floor. No, a voice inside my head commanded. Stand down, soldier. If I fought back, I was the aggressor. If I fought back, Victoria would spin this as unstable veteran attacks husband. I had to take the hit. I forced my foot back to a neutral position. I uncurled my fists. Tactical breathing. Do it now. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. I filled my lungs, smelling the scent of expensive lilies and impending violence. Hold. 2, 3, 4. I visualized the oxygen traveling to my brain, keeping the panic at bay. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. I released the tension in my shoulders. I dropped my hands to my sides, leaving my face and chest completely exposed. Hold. James was 5 feet away. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. I could see the blank, terrifying nothingness in his eyes. He wasn't breathing. He was panting, a low, animalistic sound. James, I whispered. He didn't hear me. He was trapped in a nightmare loop, seeing a monster where his wife stood. I looked at the diamond brooch on my chest. It was blinking a tiny, invisible red light in my mind. Recording. Always recording. I looked back at him. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I didn't beg. I lifted my chin. I offered him my face. Come on, baby, I thought, a single tear threatening to spill but held back by sheer will. Do it. Break me so I can save you. Give me the evidence. He stopped directly in front of me. He towered over me, blocking out the light of the chandeliers. His breathing was ragged, his hand shaking violently, raised into the air. The room held its breath. I closed my eyes, relaxed my jaw to minimize the damage, and waited for the darkness. The impact didn't register as pain at first. It registered as a sound. Crack. It was the sickening, wet sound of flesh striking flesh, amplified by the cavernous acoustics of the ballroom. James's open palm connected with the left side of my face with the force of a sledgehammer. The sheer kinetic energy lifted me off my feet. I spun backward, my hip catching the edge of the mahogany dining table. I crashed into the table setting. A heavy crystal goblet shattered against my shoulder. The plate of lobster thermidor slid off the edge, crashing to the floor in a mess of cream sauce and porcelain shards. I hit the hardwood floor hard. My vision blurred. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out the gasp that rippled through the room. For 3 seconds, I lay there. I could taste the metallic tang of copper in my mouth. My lip was split. I touched my cheek, and my fingers came away wet. I looked at my hand. It was blood. Bright, oxygenated red. It matched my dress perfectly. Above me, James stood breathing heavily, his hand still suspended in the air. He was trembling violently, staring at his own palm as if it belonged to someone else. The room was silent. Not the polite silence of earlier, but the terrified vacuum of a crowd that had just witnessed a crime. Victoria Harrington stood 30 feet away. Her hand was over her mouth, but her eyes were gleaming. She had won. She had put the unruly dog down. Or so she thought. Lying on the floor, amidst the broken glass and spilled wine, I felt something bubbling up in my chest. It wasn't a sob. It wasn't a scream. It was a laugh. It started low, a guttural rumble in my throat, and then it broke free. I started laughing. It was a cold, jagged sound, the laugh of a soldier who just watched the enemy walk directly into a minefield. I pushed myself up. My hair was disheveled. Blood trickled from my lip down my chin, dripping onto the diamond brooch pinned to my chest. I stood up. I didn't wipe the blood away. I let it be seen. I let it be the evidence. Heidi! Victoria's voice wavered. She took a step back, her triumph faltering. Have you lost your mind? I looked straight at her. I smiled, and my teeth were stained red. No, Victoria, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I haven't lost anything. But you? I took a step toward her. The guest parted like the Red Sea, terrified of the woman who laughed at violence. You just lost everything, I whispered. I reached up and touched the brooch. I pressed the tiny hidden button on the back. It's done, I said clearly into the microphone. Take them. Victoria frowned. Who are you talking to? Before she could finish the sentence, a sound erupted. Bees, these, bees, these, bees, bees. It wasn't one phone, it was 50. Every smartphone in the room lit up simultaneously. The jarring, discordant sound of the emergency alert system filled the ballroom, a digital cacophony that drowned out the whimpers of the guests. Senator Collins pulled his phone from his pocket. His face went pale. My God, he whispered. What is it? Victoria demanded, looking around frantically. Turn that off. It's a news alert, the senator stammered, holding up his screen. From the Boston Globe and CNN. It's a video. On 50 screens, a video began to autoplay. It was footage I'd uploaded to the cloud 3 minutes ago via the dead man's switch. It showed Dr. Whitley injecting a restrained James with antipsychotics. It showed Victoria signing fraudulent trust documents. And the headline scrolling across the bottom was in bold red letters. Breaking: Harrington Dynasty indicted for torture, fraud, and money laundering. No, Victoria gasped. She looked at me, her eyes wide with true horror for the first time. What did you do? I told the truth, I said. And now, here comes the consequence. Crash! The double oak doors at the main entrance didn't just open, they exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew across the foyer as a battering ram smashed through the lock. Federal agents! A voice roared, magnified by a megaphone. Get on the ground. Nobody moves. Chaos erupted. The polite society of Boston dissolved into panic. Women screamed and dropped to the floor. Men in tuxedos raised their hands, cowering. Through the smoke and dust, a team of 12 tactical officers poured into the room. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing Kevlar vests emblazoned with FBI and military police. Their boots thundered on the floor, a glorious rhythm of justice. Dozens of red laser dots swept across the room, cutting through the dim light like lightsabers. One dot landed on Senator Collins's chest, another on Dr. Whitley's forehead, and 3 dots converged directly on Victoria's chest. Victoria Harrington! Agent Miller's voice boomed as he stormed through the breach, his weapon raised. Step away from the subject. Put your hands where I can see them. Victoria stood frozen. Her face was a mask of disbelief. In her world, police knocked on the back door and asked for permission. In her world, money fixed everything. But money doesn't stop a federal raid. This is a mistake, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Do you know who I am? I am Victoria Harrington. And you are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and the assault of a federal officer, Miller shouted, advancing on her. Behind him, 2 MPs moved toward James. They didn't tackle him, they moved with precision. Secure the asset, one of them yelled. Get a medic on him now. James stood there, blinking, confused by the noise and the lights. He looked at his hands, then at the agents swarming him. I stood in the center of the storm, untouched. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a wave of exhaustion, but I held my ground. I looked at Victoria one last time. She was trembling. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, looking for a lawyer, looking for a way out. But there was no exit. The walls she had built to keep the world out had just become the walls of her cell. Her hand shook violently. The crystal champagne flute she'd been holding, the symbol of her power, her toast to my destruction, slipped from her fingers. Time seemed to slow down again for one final second. I watched the glass fall. It hit the hardwood floor. Shatter! The sound of the breaking glass marked the end of an era. The Harrington dynasty lay in pieces on the floor, mixed with lobster sauce and lies. 2 agents grabbed Victoria's arms, spinning her around. The cold metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Heidi! She screamed as they dragged her away, her dignity gone, her hair wild. You ungrateful little bitch! I own this city! You can't do this! I reached up and unpinned the diamond brooch from my dress. My hand was steady. Actually, Victoria, I said quietly, though she couldn't hear me over the chaos. I think you'll find that the United States government owns this city tonight. I turned away from her. I turned toward the medics working on James. The war was over, but the rescue mission had just begun. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The monotone voice of Agent Miller reciting the Miranda warning was the only steady sound in a room that had descended into madness. The grand ballroom, just minutes ago a sanctuary of high society, now looked like a war zone. Chairs were overturned. Expensive hors d'oeuvres were trampled into the Persian rugs. The air smelled of spilled alcohol, sweat, and fear. I stood in the center of the wreckage, dabbing my split lip with a linen napkin that cost more than my first car. I watched as they hauled Victoria Harrington toward the exit. She wasn't walking with her usual regal glide. She was being dragged, her silver heels scraping uselessly against the floorboards. Her impeccably sprayed hair was coming loose, falling in frantic strands around a face contorted with rage. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, thrashing against Miller's grip. "Do you know who my lawyers are? I will have your badge. I will bury you." "Save it for the judge, Mrs. Harrington," Miller grunted, tightening his hold on her arm. I walked toward them. The crowd of FBI agents parted to let me pass. Victoria saw me coming. She stopped struggling. Her eyes, usually so cold and calculated, were wide and wild. "Heidi," she gasped, trying to switch tactics, trying to find the manipulation button one last time. "Heidi, tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Your family. You can't let them do this to family." I stopped 2 feet away from her. I looked down at the handcuffs biting into her wrists. Cold, industrial steel locking against her diamond tennis bracelet. It was a poetic contrast. I didn't speak with anger. I spoke with the flat, emotionless tone of a prosecutor reading a verdict. "It's not a misunderstanding, Victoria," I said. "It's an indictment." I held up my phone, displaying the digital file I had just sent to the district attorney. "Money laundering through the Harrington Hope Charity Foundation." I listed the charges, ticking them off on my fingers. "Tax evasion totaling $12 million over 5 years. Conspiracy to commit fraud." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "And the big one. Medical abuse, chemical restraint, false imprisonment. You drugged your own son to keep control of his checkbook." The mask fell off. In an instant, the Queen of Beacon Hill vanished. The philanthropic socialite dissolved. Standing in front of me was just a vicious, cornered animal. Victoria lunged at me, restrained only by the handcuffs and Agent Miller's grip. Spittle flew from her mouth. "You ungrateful little gutter rat!" she screamed, her voice raw and ugly. "I took you in. I scraped you off the bottom of the barrel and gave you a life you didn't deserve. You're nothing. You're just trash with a uniform." The guests who hadn't fled, the senators, the judges, the old money vampires, stared in horror. They had never heard Victoria raise her voice, let alone use language like that. They were seeing the monster she hid behind the pearls. "I might be trash, Victoria," I said calmly, wiping a speck of her spit from my cheek. "But I'm trash that's walking free. Enjoy federal prison. I hear the jumpsuits are orange, not really your color." "Get her out of here," Miller ordered. "You'll pay for this," Victoria howled as they dragged her through the broken double doors. "You'll rot in hell, Heidi. You hear me? You'll rot." Her screams faded down the hallway, replaced by the crackle of police radios. I didn't watch her go. I turned around. The adrenaline that had fueled me for the last hour began to drain away, leaving my knees shaking. But I couldn't collapse yet. There was one more casualty to deal with: James. He was sitting on the floor near the fireplace, surrounded by 2 EMTs and a bewildered MP. He looked small. The drugs Victoria had pumped into him were wearing off, the aggressive spike of adrenaline crashing into a deep, dark valley of confusion. He was staring at his hands. I walked over to him. The EMTs looked up, saw my face, saw the blood, and stepped back to give us space. "James," I said softly. His head snapped up. For the first time all night, maybe for the first time in years, his eyes were clear. The black dilated pupils had shrunk back to normal. The hazel iris was visible, swimming in tears. He looked at me. He looked at the red dress. And then, his gaze locked onto my mouth. The cut on my lip was swollen now. The blood had dried in a dark streak down my chin. James let out a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a word. It was a whimper of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked back at his own hand, the hand that had struck me. He started to shake. "No," he croaked, his voice raspy. "No, no, no." "It's over, James," I said. "I did that," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "I hit you. Oh God, Heidi." He collapsed forward. He didn't just cry. He broke. He curled into a ball on the hardwood floor, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with violent sobs. It was the sound of a man waking up from a 5-year coma only to realize he had been the monster in his own nightmare. "I'm sorry," he screamed into the floor, his voice cracking. "Please, God, I'm sorry, I didn't know. She told me. She said you were. I'm sorry." Every instinct in my body, the wife instinct, the nurturer instinct, screamed at me to drop to my knees. I wanted to hold him. I wanted to stroke his hair and tell him it wasn't his fault, that he was drugged, that he was a victim too. I took a step forward. My hand reached out. Then I stopped. I looked at the bruise on my wrist. I felt the throbbing pain in my jaw. If I hugged him now, if I comforted him while my own blood was still wet on my face, nothing would change. I would just be enabling the cycle. I would be the crutch he leaned on instead of his mother. He didn't need a mother. He needed to be a man. I pulled my hand back. I stood tall, my red dress blazing like a warning fire. "James," I said, my voice firm. He looked up, his face a mess of tears and snot, his eyes pleading for forgiveness, for comfort. "I love you," I said, and I meant it. "And because I love you, I fought for you. I took the hit for you. I destroyed her for you." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But I am not going to pick you up off the floor," I said. "I saved you from her. But I can't save you from the recovery. You have to do that." "Heidi, please." He reached for the hem of my dress. I stepped back, just out of his reach. "You need help, James. Real help. Not from me, and not from her. You need to dry out. You need to find out who you are when you aren't being controlled. Don't leave me," he sobbed. "I'm not leaving you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I'm just stepping back so you can learn how to stand." I looked at the EMTs. "Take him to Mass General, get him a detox protocol, and get him a lawyer who isn't on the Harrington payroll." "Yes, ma'am." The medic nodded. I looked at James one last time. He was broken, yes, but he was free. The cage was open. Now he had to decide if he wanted to fly or just crawl back into the dark. I turned around and walked toward the shattered doors. The night air rushed in to meet me, cold and clean. I walked past the police cars, past the flashing lights, and out into the darkness. I was bleeding. I was exhausted. I was alone. But for the first time in 5 years, I could breathe. Bang. The sound of the judge's gavel hitting the mahogany block echoed through the federal courtroom. It was a sharp, final sound, the sound of a book snapping shut. "Life without the possibility of parole," Judge Harrison declared, his voice devoid of pity. I watched from the gallery, sitting in the back row. 6 months ago, I had walked into a ballroom in a red dress to start a war. Today, I sat in a simple navy blazer to watch the surrender. Victoria Harrington didn't scream this time. She didn't threaten. She looked small, shrunken in her orange jumpsuit, stripped of her diamonds, her designer silk, and her name. She was just inmate 8940 now. As the marshals led her away, she didn't look back. The empire was gone. I walked out of the John Joseph Moakley courthouse and stepped into the blinding afternoon sun. The air off Boston Harbor was crisp and salty. For the first time in 5 years, the air didn't taste like secrets. It tasted like oxygen. Reporters were waiting at the bottom of the steps, microphones raised like bayonets. They shouted questions about the scandal, about the millions seized by the DOJ, about the movie rights. I pulled my sunglasses down and walked past them. I had no comment. My story wasn't for the tabloids. It was for the truth. I walked a few blocks to a quiet park overlooking the water. I sat on a wooden bench, the wood warm against my back. I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. There was no return address, just a postmark from Vermont. I ran my thumb over the handwriting. It was shaky, the penmanship of a man relearning fine motor skills, but it was legible. I opened it. "Dear Heidi, my counselor says I should write this, not for you, but for me. But I think you deserve to read it. I've been sober for 160 days. The fog is finally lifting. I remember things now. I remember the way you looked at me when we first met. I remember the way I failed to protect you. For a long time, I was angry that you destroyed my life. But I realize now that you didn't destroy my life. You destroyed my cage. I am learning who James is when he isn't a Harrington. It's scary. It's quiet. But it's real. I am not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I'm not asking you to come back. You are a warrior, Heidi. You need a partner, not a patient. Thank you for loving me enough to hurt me. Thank you for saving me. Goodbye, James. I read the letter twice. A lump formed in my throat. Not of grief, but of a strange, aching relief. I folded the paper and put it back in my bag. I looked at my left hand. The ring finger was bare. The heavy diamond that Victoria had picked out was gone, sold along with the rest of the estate to pay restitution to the victims of the charity fraud. I didn't miss it. The tan line was already fading. I stood up and walked toward the financial district. I had one more meeting today. I entered the glass-walled office of my attorney. Agent Miller, now promoted to deputy director, was sitting there, waiting for me. Captain Austin, Miller smiled, standing up to shake my hand. Or is it civilian Austin now? It's just Heidi, I smiled back. The paperwork is finalized, the attorney said, sliding a thick document across the desk. Under the False Claims Act, as the whistleblower in a qui tam lawsuit, you are entitled to a percentage of the recovered assets. The government has seized over $200 million from the Harrington illegal trusts. He pointed to a figure at the bottom of the page. It was a number with a lot of zeros. Enough money to buy a mansion in the Hamptons. Enough money to retire to an island and never think about pain again. What are you going to do with it, Heidi? Miller asked. You've earned a vacation. I looked at the check, then I looked at Miller. I don't want a vacation, Dave, I said. I want a mission. I picked up a pen and signed the documents. I'm establishing a nonprofit, I announced. It's called the Operation Freedom Fund. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. And the objective? Legal defense and financial extraction for service members trapped in abusive marriages, I said firmly. There are thousands of soldiers out there, Dave. Men and women who can handle an insurgent with an AK-47, but don't know how to handle a spouse who drains their bank account or a family that gaslights them. I leaned forward. I want to be the cavalry for them. I want to provide the lawyers, the safe houses, the forensic accountants. I want to make sure that no soldier ever has to choose between their honor and their freedom again. Miller stared at me for a moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. You never stop fighting, do you, Austin? Not until everyone is home safe, I replied. I walked out of the office an hour later. The sun was setting over Boston, turning the skyline into a silhouette of gold and fire. I caught my reflection in a shop window. I wasn't wearing the red dress anymore. I was wearing a simple, tailored suit. But the woman in the reflection was the same. Her shoulders were back. Her head was high. The bruise on her wrist was gone, healed without a trace. But the lesson remained. I thought about Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a woman who knew about duty, about public masks and private pain. She once said something that had become my mantra during the darkest nights in that mansion. A woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong it is until it's in hot water. Victoria Harrington had thrown me into boiling water. She thought I would dissolve. She thought I would weak, flavorless, and disposable. She was wrong. The heat didn't destroy me. It brewed me. It drew out the strength I didn't know I had. It turned me into something potent, something real. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. I had walked through hell in a pair of high heels, and I had come out the other side not just alive, but free. I checked my watch. It was 18 hours. Time to go to work. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes, and stepped forward into the rest of my life. This journey wasn't just about bringing down a corrupt dynasty or seizing millions of dollars. It was about a much harder battle, realizing that your worth is never defined by the people who try to make you feel small. Victoria tried to bury me, but she forgot that I was a seed. For anyone listening who feels trapped right now, whether by a toxic relationship, a controlling family, or your own fears, please remember this. Silence is not peace, and endurance is not love. You have a reservoir of strength inside you that you haven't even touched yet. Don't wait for a hero to kick down the door and rescue you. Look in the mirror. The hero is already there. You just need to give yourself permission to fight. Now, I want to turn the microphone over to you. We all face our own Harrington manner, a challenge that seems impossible to overcome until we finally take that first step. What was the hot water moment in your life that forced you to become stronger than you ever thought possible? Share your story in the comments below. Your courage might be the exact signal flare someone else needs to see today. If Heidi's fight for freedom resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can share more stories of justice, resilience, and the unbreaking human spirit. Until next time, stay strong.